He woke up at 5:30 a.m., like always. No alarm, just habit, the invisible chain of repetition. The room was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that had texture. It filled the space like dust, soft, almost invisible, but choking if you breathed too deeply. He didn't. The coffee machine blinked like an old friend with tired eyes, black, no sugar. He sipped. It burned the edge of his tongue, but he didn't flinch. He never flinched anymore. Pain, once a protest, had become a whisper. Outside, the world moved. Cars coughed to life. Early risers jogged with earbuds plugged in like intravenous optimism. But inside his apartment, 12th floor, facing nothing, there were no windows that opened. He said it was for safety, but deep down, he knew. He just didn't want the wind to tempt him. He was 46, hair still thick but graying, muscles intact but untested. A life spent almost moved to Spain, almost wrote the novel, almost loved her back before she left, almost quit the job, almost became the man he once sketched on napkins in coffee shops, whispering, "One day." That one day was now yesterday. He stared at the bookshelf, third row, red spine. That book hadn't been touched in decades, a dusty, leather-bound journal sealed with wax. A letter from the past, a promise to the future. He laughed bitterly. He'd forgotten all about it until today, until that dream last night. In it, a boy with his eyes but no wrinkles held the journal up to the sky like a torch and screamed, "You lied." His hands hesitated, not from age, but guilt. He broke the wax and opened the cover. "To the man I'll become, if you're reading this, I hope you didn't forget me. I'm you. 16, brave, stupid, wild. I made a list. Did we do it all?" He turned the page. There it was. The list. Climb Mount Fuji, kiss Maya under the rain. Publish my first book before 30. Travel without a plan. Apologize to Dad, live one day without fear. He stopped reading. It felt like reading someone else's obituary. Every item bled a memory. Every unchecked box whispered a funeral eulogy to a version of him that died, not suddenly, but slowly, painfully, forgotten in the folds of busyness and bills. He stood still for a long time. The world outside turned golden with morning. But inside, something darker stirred. Not regret, not yet, just recognition. The soft horror of realizing how many doors he'd locked from the inside. He poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. The bitterness wasn't in the brew. It was in the man. Suddenly, he walked to the closet, pulled out an old backpack. Dust leapt like ghosts. Inside was a faded map of Japan, a plane ticket stub to Barcelona, a dried flower pressed between two poems he wrote in college, and a photo. Her, Maya, laughing mid-sneeze, her eyes galaxies of light. He hadn't seen her in 20 years, and just like that the room cracked, not literally, but spiritually, as if memory itself had clawed through the drywall. He sat down on the cold floor, journal in lap, heart like a stalled engine trying to restart. A question pulsed through his veins like static. If not now, when? In the far corner of the room, the clock ticked louder, not like time passing, but like time daring him. He flipped back to the list, touched the ink that 16-year-old him had scrawled with hope, not knowing that one day the older version of himself would need it like oxygen. Then, softly, almost imperceptibly, something broke inside him, not like a bone, more like a dam. And in that flood came everything he'd been holding back, the dreams, the failures, the aching possibility of still becoming. He didn't sleep that night. The journal sat beside his pillow like an old dog guarding its master. He stared at the ceiling, chasing the cracks in the plaster like constellations he never learned to name. His mind, once orderly, now raced with fragments. Voices, old letters, unfinished sentences. The sound of rain against a Paris window he never stood behind. At dawn, he dressed differently, not the usual grayscale office attire. Today he wore jeans that still carried the scent of summer from a long-forgotten festival. The shirt was wrinkled but warm. He looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man, not because he had changed, but because, for the first time in years, he hadn't disguised himself. He left the apartment. No phone, no plan. Just the list, item number 2, haunted him. Kiss Maya under the rain. It sounded like fiction now, like something a poet would write, not a man who filled spreadsheets for a living. But that's the thing about dreams. They don't age, even if you do. He walked until his legs ached. Streets bled into memories. And then, almost by accident, he found it. The small cafe by the theater. The one they used to skip class to visit. The chairs were still red. The clock still didn't work. The air still smelled of burnt toast and ambition. He sat. In the corner, a boy read a book and underlined every line. Another version of himself, maybe. One still building fire inside. The waitress brought him coffee. He smiled and said, "Thank you," like it mattered. She returned the smile, and something small inside him softened, like a rusted hinge finally giving way. He took out the journal and stared at the list again. Every word felt like a key to a door he never opened. He remembered how Maya used to write her name backward on fogged windows, how she used to whisper dreams like secrets the stars had told her, how she once looked him in the eyes and said, "The tragedy isn't dying, it's living without ever having lived." And he had laughed, called it poetic, then went home to study for an exam he doesn't even remember taking. He had chosen logic, chosen security, chosen everything that looked good on paper but felt like cardboard in the soul. And now here he was, with a journal and a ghost, trying to reconstruct a life from the rubble of dreams. He reached into his wallet, pulled out a number he'd never dialed. Her Maya he didn't call. Not yet. Instead, he walked toward the park where they once sat under a leaking umbrella and talked about running away to Italy to write plays and eat oranges by the sea. He sat on their bench, now cracked, the paint flaking like forgotten memories. It began to rain, soft at first, then all at once. He didn't move, and for a moment he imagined her sitting beside him. Same laugh, same spark, but older now, wiser. She turned to him, water dripping from her lashes like silver threads. "You left me in the rain," she whispered. "I didn't mean to," he answered. "But you did." The thunder rolled like regret. He closed his eyes, felt the rain soak his clothes, and for the first time in years, he felt something real, alive. He laughed, not bitterly, not broken, just laughed. A laugh with teeth and tremble, a laugh that shook the leaves, a laugh that sounded like someone being reborn. Back at home, he pulled out the dusty box at the bottom of his closet. Letters he never sent, tickets he never used, sketches of characters he never wrote, and at the bottom, a key. He remembered now an old cabin, deep in the woods, his retreat, the place he once promised to finish his novel. He'd locked it up after Maya left, told himself it was impractical, but now the key felt like more than metal. It felt like permission. He held it tight, trembling, because the door he never opened when was still waiting. The road to the cabin was, as he remembered, narrow, serpentine, lined with whispering trees that bowed inward like ancient guardians. Time hadn't paved over the past here. The gravel still crunched beneath the tires. The fog still clung to the trees like secrets. He hadn't been back in 17 years, not since Maya, not since the dream died, and he folded it neatly like a used napkin and placed it in the back of his mind. But now, with the journal in the glove compartment and the list carved into his bones, he returned. The key slid into the lock with resistance, like the cabin itself was reluctant to remember him. Then with a sigh, it opened. Dust rose in lazy spirals. The air was thick with pine and ghosts. His old typewriter still sat in the corner, half covered by a moth-eaten blanket. The paper still rolled inside it read only one sentence. He stood on the edge, not knowing if he would fall or fly. He stared at it for a long time. The metaphor was obvious, too obvious, but it was honest, and sometimes honesty arrives like a thunderclap, late but deafening. He lit a fire, cooked a simple meal. Then, standing in front of the cracked bathroom mirror, he saw him, the stranger. Not the man in the suit, not the tired worker, but someone else, someone raw, wounded, real. His eyes were bloodshot, not from sleeplessness, but from seeing too much truth at once. His hands trembled, not from age, but from anticipation. He looked deeper. This was not a mirror anymore. It was a doorway, and what he saw was terrifying, because behind his own reflection stood every version of himself he had abandoned. The 12-year-old who wrote poems in secret and cried when no one read them. The 18-year-old who kissed Maya behind the bookstore and felt invincible. The 25-year-old who almost moved to Barcelona, but stayed for a promotion he never wanted. And the 35-year-old who had the novel half finished, waiting for the right time that never came. They all looked at him. None smiled. He touched the mirror. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I forgot. You." And from within that silence came a single question, and now. He sat down. The journal lay beside him. He picked up a pen. His fingers hovered over the page like birds over still water. Then slowly, he checked off one box. Live one day without fear. He exhaled. The dam cracked a little more. It wasn't about accomplishments anymore. It was about alignment, about remembering the melody of his soul before the noise of the world. Drowned it out, that night, he wrote. Not for publishing, not for fame, but like a man trying to rebuild his heart, brick by bleeding brick. The words came haltingly, then faster. The characters spoke to him like old friends. He lost sense of time. Outside, the storm wailed like a mother who'd waited too long, but inside, the room glowed with fire and focus. Around midnight, he stepped outside. The rain had stopped. The moon split the clouds with surgical grace. He looked up, and in the moonlight, for the first time in decades, he whispered a promise. "I won't die with dreams. I'll die with memories." It wasn't a declaration, it was a prayer. And prayers, when said honestly, changed the very fabric of reality. He walked back inside, dripping moonlight and resolve. The fire purred. The typewriter waited, and in that sacred space between past and future, he wrote the first line of a story that could save him. The morning came like forgiveness, quiet, golden, and undeserved. He woke on the cabin floor, curled, near the dying fire. His back ached, his neck stiff, but his heart beat with a kind of urgency he hadn't felt since his 20s. Outside, the trees stood taller. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was sacred. He brewed coffee on the stove, black and bitter, just the way Maya used to tease him about. The steam curled upward, twisting like memory. He sat at the wooden table, journal open, typewriter loaded. He checked another box. Write the first page of the novel, but it wasn't just one page. He kept writing, as if the dam inside him had finally burst, and every unwritten word came pouring out. Stories he had swallowed, truths he had buried, conversations he should have had. Characters walked into his mind without knocking. Some were old lovers in new cities, some were children who forgave their fathers, and one was him. A man searching for meaning long after everyone else had stopped searching. He wrote about fear, not as an enemy, but as a compass, about ego, not as power, but as a mask hiding a frightened child, about dreams, not as illusions, but as instructions from the soul. By noon, the desk was a battlefield, pages scattered like fallen soldiers, ink smudged like blood. But he felt alive in the Mess more than alive. He felt lit from within. When the knock came, he thought he imagined it. Then again, softer this time. He opened the door, and there she stood, Maya. Older, different, but unmistakably her. Hair streaked with silver, eyes deeper than he remembered, as if she'd walked through her own fire to arrive here. She didn't speak at first, just looked at him like someone inspecting an old wound, familiar, still tender. "You kept the key," she said. "You remembered the address," he replied. Silence filled the space between them, like a breath waiting to be exhaled. "I don't know why I'm here," she admitted. "I think you do," he said. "I think we both do." They sat. He poured her coffee. She made the same face she always did, too strong. He smiled. "I started writing again," he said almost defensively, like a child presenting a crayon drawing. "I always knew you would," she answered. He looked down. The words he wanted to say tangled themselves in shame. Regret clung to his ribs like vines. "I was scared," he confessed. "I thought if I chose the dream, I'd lose everything else, so I chose nothing." She reached across the table, placed her hand on his. "You chose safety. That's not nothing, but it wasn't you." He nodded. The tears came quietly, not explosive. Just a soft release, like rain melting snow. "I thought it was too late," he whispered. "It's only too late. If you stop," she said. And you didn't. They walked through the woods like they once did, their steps quiet but full of unsaid things. She showed him a photo of her daughter. He showed her the journal. They spoke of old dreams like old friends, some dead, some just asleep. When they returned to the cabin, she lingered at the door. "I can't stay," she said. "I know, but I'm glad you opened it." "Me too." She stepped closer. Their eyes met. It didn't need to be romantic. It didn't need to be anything but true. She kissed him on the cheek, soft, warm, real. "Make it count this time," she said. And then she was gone. The door closed behind her, but the light remained, and he stood there, half in shadow, half in fire. The place inside him where everything once broke now glowed. He picked up the journal, checked another box. "Kiss Maya under." The rain, not exactly how he imagined it. But then again, life never is, and maybe that's the beauty of it. He stayed for 7 days, 7 days of reckoning, rewriting, remembering. He fed the fire, walked the woods, wrote until his fingers ached. And every day, he became less of the man he was, and more of the boy he used to be. On the morning of the 7th day, he stood at the edge of the lake, where the mist clung low and the world felt like a half-remembered dream. In his hands, the journal. Pages filled, boxes checked, ink running, like veins through paper. But one box remained. "Forgive yourself." He stared at it for a long time. The sun rose, shy and gold. As if afraid to touch him, his hands trembled because this was the one he couldn't fake. He had forgiven others. The boss who broke his spirit, the father who never stayed, even Maya for leaving without saying goodbye. But himself, he carried his failures like heirlooms, wore guilt like a second skin. "I wasted years," he said aloud, voice cracking. "I ran from my calling. I hurt people who loved me. I was small when I should have been brave." And the lake said nothing back. He threw a stone across the water. It skipped twice, then sank. "I don't deserve forgiveness." But then a whisper, not from the lake, not from the trees, from within. "Forgiveness isn't earned. It's accepted." He sank to his knees, and for the first time, not as a writer, not as a man performing redemption, but as a broken, breathing soul, he wrote it down. "I forgive you." It was shaky, imperfect, but real. He checked the final box. The journal closed with a satisfying weight, as if the pages themselves sighed with relief. He packed lightly. The cabin didn't need to be owned, just visited. The novel pages, the journal, a photograph of Maya from years ago, all tucked into a leather satchel. He didn't look back as he walked to the car, not because he wasn't sentimental, but because he knew the path would always be there. The past had been witnessed and finally put to rest. Back in the city, things looked the same, but he didn't. He moved through the world with quieter eyes, a slower breath, a steadier pulse. People asked him what changed. He said nothing. But he wrote every day, and the novel became a mirror for strangers, a confession in disguise, a lantern for those still lost. When it published, it didn't sell millions, but it saved hundreds, and that was enough. Because one day, a letter arrived, written in shaky handwriting. It read, "I was going to give up. I had the pills, the note, everything, but I found your book in a thrift store by accident or fate, and I read it all night, and I cried harder than I ever have. And then I threw the pills away, because if you can forgive yourself, maybe I can too. Thank you for surviving." He held the letter for a long time, then folded it, placed it inside the journal, right under that final box. He never replied. There was no return address. But he lit a candle that night. For her, for himself, for everyone who still had dreams gathering dust. And when he died, years later, quietly, with laugh lines at his eyes and ink stains on his fingers, people came not to mourn, but to remember. They told stories, not of his success, but of his softness, how he listened, how he looked at people like they were art, how he lived not with fame, but with fire, and in the end, that mattered more. A young writer placed a worn copy of his journal on the casket and whispered, "I won't die with dreams. I'll die with memories," and the wind carried it. If this story opened a wound, or maybe healed one, if it reminded you of a dream you buried, or a part of you you're still afraid to meet, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who still believes in second chances. And watch the video showing on screen right now. It might just save them, or save you. Because the goal was never perfection. The goal is to die with memories, not dreams.